Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Matt Crafton. I'm the winemaker at Chateau Montelena, and I'm here with Bill Hanna, one of our longtime growers. And we're really excited about today to talk to you about our Chardonnay program and the special grapes that Bill brings. And we really want this to be interactive. So ask questions, get involved. It's a lot more fun that way. I talk enough already. My wife will tell you that. So it's much more fun if you all have some questions that you can bring to us. So want to just basically tell you a little bit of information about Chateau Montelena first. We were founded originally in 1882 by Alfred Tubbs, and who was a state senator, and built our beautiful castle up in Calistoga. And recently, well, our most recent incarnation, the winery was purchased by the Barrett family in 1970 and still remains under Barrett ownership today. And we're probably most well known for our 1973 Chardonnay, which bested the Great Burgundies in 1976 at the Judgment of Paris. And I happen to have Bill Hanna with us, whose vineyard in Oak Knoll was a big part of that winning Chardonnay. And unfortunately, we don't have that bottle here from us today. There are only a few left. One's in the Smithsonian if you want to go get it. But we feel that Chardonnay is just as good today as it was back then. So.
Okay, well, as Matt mentioned, I'm Bill Hanna, and my dad's vineyard was in that very first vintage of Montelena in 72, and then again in the 73 that won the Paris tasting. And it's been in every vintage since. And we started in California in the 1850s, 1853 or so, with my great-great-grandfather John Strenzel planting vines in Martinez, California. Then his son-in-law was John Muir, the naturalist, and he farmed the ranch for a while. And then his eldest daughter, Wanda, my grandmother, farmed there, and my father learned growing grapes there and finally moved to Napa in 1950. And of course, growing up on a farm raising prunes and cattle made me not want to farm, so I went to college and got a degree in chemistry and joined the Air Force to avoid the draft during Vietnam and see the world, and got assigned to Sacramento as my first assignment. So we'd come home on weekends and help Dad put in the vineyard, and decided Napa was a really pretty place, and grapes looked economic, and so we bought the property right down the street and been farming since 1977 full time.
It's really a wonderful spot where we farm Chardonnay. It's our own beautiful little corner of the west side of Oak Knoll, right on the bench. So those of you who've been to Napa, Oak Knoll is immediately north of the city of Napa. And what's really fantastic about that spot, especially on the west side, is we get the wonderful warm California sun, the ripening weather we need to develop those incredible floral and melon and stone fruit aromatics you taste in our wines, but we also get enough cool weather in the evenings to preserve that beautiful, vibrant acidity that makes the wine so delicious. And because of that, we've really searched far and wide to find suitable vineyard sites that fit that profile that we love. Honestly, we love to drink it, which is why we make it. And there are only a few places in the valley that can actually do that. And Bill's vineyard, the John Muir Hanna vineyard, has really been the backbone of that program for years now, 40 plus years now.
Yep.
And we started making Chardonnay in 1972 for cash flow. I found that out from Bo. Bo finally admitted that, and it turned into from this little project into something that we all really love to make and really enjoy. So with that, I wanted to open it up to see if anyone has any questions to get things started. Anybody? Nobody. Somebody has a question.
Oh, we have some online.
Okay, perfect.
Hi there, Matt and Bill. David Bridges here in Napa. I have a question for a bunch of Montelena lovers that are back in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Is there a flavor profile difference or a sugar difference in the grapes now from the old Spurrier tasting grapes? Would love to know it, and love your stuff for a long time.
When we started selling grapes and the way everything was handled way back in the 70s, before you were born,
I wasn't
right?
born in the 70s, so I'm glad Bill's handling this one. So.
we used to pick between 22 degrees Brix and 24 degrees Brix, period. And, if we went over 24, we got penalized generally. Now, the grapes are picked at flavor points as opposed to paying a lot of attention to the sugar. And so there is a little difference in the ripening and the flavor profiles, I would think, between now and then.
Absolutely. I mean, Bill can tell you I'm really not a slave driver for sugar. He's absolutely right. We pick by flavor now, and a lot of that comes from the fact that, being farming here and seeing how farming's developed over the last 20, 30, 40 years, we're using cleaner plant materials. We're using GPS to plant vineyards. We're looking at, we're developing trellis systems that allow better sunlight in without totally geeking out on you. What it means is we've built this little plant paradise where the vines can really express and develop. And because of that, we can kind of reach for new heights. We're not here to make white port. We want to make you a beautiful table wine that you can have more than a glass of. And if you want a cocktail, I like cocktails too, you can have those. But for the Chardonnay, the target on this is to make just a wonderfully elegant table wine that is, it's really embodies and is emblematic of the place where it's grown. And that's true for all of our wines, but especially with this one because the area is so special. So yeah, the sugar's changed. I think the flavors are better now. I think they're more precise. I can't speak to the 70s, but I've heard a lot of good things about it, and I've heard a lot of bad things too. But it certainly was, especially for the houses. Gosh. But I guess the take home is that the target for where the wine is supposed to be hasn't really changed. We work on making that more precise every year, and it's working in the cellar, and then also working with Bill that we're able to accomplish that.
Well, I think one of the things that changed too, and not all that long ago, was we used to pick we'd start in the morning and pick until we finished in the afternoon. And now we're picking at night. And so the grapes are coming in at 55 degrees or 60 degrees instead of 70 or 80 or sometimes even 90 degrees. And so the flavors that are captured with that, the volatile aromas are more in the wine now than they were before, and there's also less bitterness that you're extracting from the skin. So some of the new ways of doing things are much, much better than the older ways.
And if you've never seen a night pick in Napa, it's unbelievable. Basically, you drive up the valley, it's totally dark, and the tractors, which have these huge light booms on them, kind of float over the valley. They look kind of like UFOs as they're going around. It's one of the coolest things. When I first moved here, 7 or 8 years ago now, this was something that you just don't see anywhere else in the world. And you have these extremely efficient and really, just wonderful vineyard crews that go out there and bust their tails to get these grapes picked at night. And Bill's absolutely right. We see a huge quality difference. I mean, just like you at the end of the day, if you've been sitting out in the sun all day, you're not showing your best. And it's the same thing with grapevines. So those berries, when we do pick them at 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning, are really at their peak, and we capture that and get them up to the winery as quick as we can. Any more questions?
Got another question?
Sure.
So
step on up.
How do you see with the drought of the last year, how do you see yields coming in and quality coming in? And then going forward, have you thought about how, if there's a long-term drought stretch, how that might impact just the industry in general, and kind of thoughts on farming and then winemaking?
Well, I'll take the farming aspect of it. We had a wonderful amount of rain right at the end of February and early March, and it totally saturated the soil profile. So we had ample water in the soil ready to go for the season. There wasn't enough to do a whole lot of recharging of the groundwater table, but our soils are deep enough that a lot of us can farm without having to add extra water. And what we have done is avoided planting really closely together. There are some vineyards planted with 2,000 vines an acre on weaker rootstocks that require water even in good years. we've kept our vines to about 700 an acre so that we can, if we need to go without adding extra water, we can cut the crop load down and the vines will survive. And we could do that for multiple years.
Just like in most things in winemaking and farming, you hope for the best but plan for the worst. And luckily, grapevines are very drought tolerant in general. And consequently, if you're able to understand what the vine's needs are throughout the year, you can farm it accordingly. And that's, Bill has a good understanding of the water levels in his vineyard and also understanding what his vines need. So at Montelena, at least at the estate vineyard and also in our Chardonnay vineyards, we've tried to dry farm as much as we can. We think it's good for quality. You definitely sacrifice some yield, but the idea is, thankfully we're at a place where Montelena in general, we don't need to make 1 million cases of wine a year in order to keep the doors open. We can focus on what we love to do and what we do well. From a winemaking perspective on the drought, it affects the chemistry. It absolutely does. And when you're making wine, you wear a number of different hats. Some days you're wearing the chemist, scientist hat. Other days you're wearing the artist hat when you're putting together blends like this. And so this is a year where we're putting on our science hats and we're monitoring chemistries very closely. And at the end of the day, because we're not beholden to something or someone specific in terms of how many cases we have to make, or we don't have a style that is really dependent on really uber ripe grapes or high yields or something like that. Our goal in the cellar is to take the best of this vintage, droughty or not, and put that into a bottle and express to you the very best parts of that. And we do that in the wet years and the dry years. So hopefully what you'll get from us this year and what you will get from us is just a wine that just embodies 2014 beautifully and shows off the best parts of this year. Good question. Yeah, Brett, fire off another one, sure.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Wiggins, and I'm sending you this video question from my home in Sassoon City, California. I have a question for Matt, but first, Matt, I just wanted to tell you congratulations on your appointment as head winemaker up there at Chateau Montelena, which happens to be one of my personal favorite wineries. My question is this. Bo Barrett has done a magnificent job of creating iconic wines and setting a name for Chateau Montelena and the Napa Valley in the wine world, going back 4 decades and a year now to the 1973 vintage that set the world on its ear as far as wines are concerned in that 1976 tasting in France. Will you be following those traditions exclusively, or do you think you might branch out and give us a taste of some of your own style and passion in producing wines for Chateau Montelena, and what might we be looking forward to seeing from you as winemaker at Chateau Montelena? Certainly is an exciting time. Thanks very much for taking this question. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and cheers.
That's a big question.
Yeah, it is.
Get my crystal ball out and look into the future. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I've been with the Montelena winemaking team now for just over 6 years. So this is not a brand new position for me. And dare I say that maybe some of my stylistic preferences have made their ways out through the years. So I think one thing that's really wonderful about the winemaking team that we have at Montelena is that Bo's very, very good at the people he selects, I think, of course, for coming to work here, and that we all agree on some really basic fundamentals. And while we don't agree on everything, which I think is also a good thing, we do see eye to eye in terms of what's important, not only in the cellar, but also in the vineyard, in producing just these wonderful wines that we make. That's really different from following a recipe. And I'm definitely not a recipe-driven winemaker. I think you have to have fun in what you're doing. You have to try new things. You have to take risks, the right ones at least, to be able to succeed. And for us, that means constantly working towards that target of bringing the best we can to our customers. And so I think what you may see is, our style overall will probably stay the same, but you'll see more focus. You'll see all of us working together as a team, because this really is a team effort from the top all the way down to the guy who's watering the roses at the ends of the vineyard rows. I mean, it's a team effort where everybody's pitching in and doing their part. So I guess my answer to that question is, it would be a wonderful thing if you didn't notice too many differences, but I also want you to see that the wines aren't static. They're alive, they're growing, they're evolving, and I don't think we'll ever hit that point. I hope we never hit that point where we're like, okay, that's it. This is the best wine we ever made. We write down how we did it so we can go and do it again next year. So it's a work in progress, but that's what makes this business and this winery specifically so wonderful. So. Oh, I'm getting. Let's talk about the wines now. So, get that. That's Callie in the back. She makes sure I stay on track. So thank you for that. What we have today and what you may have at home, we have two wines in front of us, both 2011 vintage. 2011 vintage. On my left-hand side, this is our Napa Valley Chardonnay, and on the right, this is the John Muir Hanna Select. So it's a vineyard designate made from Bill's grapes. And do you want to give a little introduction on how the vineyard designate came about? Because I think that's a pretty cool story.
Okay. My dad passed away in 2007 in the wintertime, and of course he had been a loyal supporter of Chateau Montelena since 1972, and so the gang up at the old chateau wanted to honor him somehow, and so at the wine auction, they did, instead of doing a red wine for a barrel lot, they did a Chardonnay from Dad's vineyard, and they had the history of the family in California, and also the history of Dad with Chateau Montelena and us, the rest of the family. And that got a lot of publicity, and people really liked the story, and that barrel was in the top third of the money raisers for the auction that year.
Which is unheard of for a white wine.
For a white wine?
Yeah, never happens.
Yeah. So they decided, well, maybe we have something by the tail here, so they started doing 100 cases a year.
About 100 cases a year, that's right.
For the high-end wine club of just select barrels out of Dad's Vineyard's fruit.
So it was definitely, it was one of our better cockamamie schemes. We thought it was something very befitting for your dad and a real honor for us to make. And that turns out it's really good too. So it worked out. Worked out
good
really
all
well.
around.
Yeah, so everyone wins with this deal. And so, as Bill said, we only make about 100 cases of it a year. And in putting it together, we've gone through a bunch of different winemaking techniques and a bunch of different strategies in trying to tease out what we would consider to be the best aspects of Bill's Vineyard, of which there are quite a few. And so our goal is we're not necessarily going in and saying, we want to take what we would consider to be the flashiest barrels or the wines that are necessarily just completely, or the barrels that are completely blockbuster right off the bat. What we're looking for is for this sense of place, this sense of what makes Bill's Vineyard so special. Because in reality, we only make one other vineyard designate, and that's our estate Cabernet. So this was really the first time in a long time that we've done that. And so if you taste the two wines side by side, which you all have here today, I think you'll notice quite a bit of similarity between the two, and that comes from the transparent winemaking that I referred to before, where we're trying to show off what we have that makes us so unique. So what you'll see in both Napa Valley and the Vineyard Designate is a relatively low proportion of New Oak. The Napa Valley is in barrel for about 14 months, or actually 10 months on this product. And then Bill stays in barrel for about 14 months. And stylistically, back in the day, I think when Jim Barrett, who passed away last year, was talking with the winemaker Mike Gergich and putting together the Chardonnay, they really wanted to focus on Merceau Le Charme, just a beautifully elegant French white Burgundy. And now that's really grown and developed. We've kept the the grace and the elegance and the wonderful acid profile from Burgundy, but added those beautiful ripe California flavors. I mean, they're just delicious, and we're really we're happy that it shows so well in our wines. So.
It's great wine.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about you have a question here.
Okay.
Hello, this is Matt Simpson from Traverse City, Michigan. In Chardonnay, I've always been curious, what does the barrel really do? Because I've seen Chardonnays that are built in steel, I've tasted them made in concrete, and I've tasted them brought up in new oak barrels and used oak barrels. And I've always had a fascination as to why so many different fermentations for the same variety. Thank you for taking my question.
It's a good question, Matt. Barrels. So anyone who's ever visited a winery before, I'm sure sees. You guys probably saw some of our barrels sitting out front. We have a lot of barrels, to put it mildly. They're for the Chardonnay program. All of our barrels are French, 228 liters. Most of that is based on tradition. And but the way you have to look at barrels is kind of like cooking with spice, be it chili powder or you're making dessert cinnamon, where the point is to add a little bit of nuance without stealing the show. And so it's very easy and very trendy nowadays to take new oak barrels and integrate them in their wine because, hey, the barrel's expensive, it must make the wine better. But what you see is that when you add too much of anything, it ends up overshadowing the best parts of the rest of the dish from a cooking perspective. To your question about concrete and stainless and all those things, they're really means to an end. It's one of the few inputs we have on the winemaking side to tease out the nuances and the unique aspects of every lot. And obviously, different vessels have different flavor profiles, and all of that is a giant game of biochemistry and how that interacts with the yeast. And I won't put all of you to sleep here, but just understand that the point of it is that it's there to support the underlying flavors and aromas of the grapes. So my belief is that if you taste too much barrel in any wine, the winemaker isn't doing his job. The winemaking should really highlight the best parts of the fruit, and that's what we look for. So while this Chardonnay ages in 100% French oak barrels for all the time that it is aging, only a small percentage is new, and it's really that new percentage, again, 8 to 10% nowadays, to impart a little bit of suppleness, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of that toasty sweetness that we really like without overshadowing some of the more delicate flavors. So, good question.
I think one of the terms that is used with the barrel component of a wine is that the barrel flavors should marry with the grapes so that they're really indistinguishable.
Absolutely.
And neither one overshadows the other, but it complements each other.
Absolutely. And it's not easy to accomplish. There are probably 50 different coopers around the world who each say that I burn wood the best, and sort of trying everyone out. It's a game of sort of a conservative decision making where you definitely don't want to screw anything up, but you have to take a little bit of a risk to figure out what works. And that's where 40 plus years of working with the same fruit and understanding what's so great about it gives us a leg up in looking to what really works in the cellar. Good question. Sure, fire away. Oh, you have a question? Great.
All right, so just as a segue here, we're talking about oak as a complement to wine, most wines, of course, but also when we talk about wines, we talk about food pairing. So if you could just, maybe talk about some of your favorite, say, Old World and New World food pairings, and what else might people enjoy with Chateau Montelena and the John Muir. Thanks.
You start on that.
Okay. Food pairing. All right. We have a whole class on this. It's funny. I think everybody's heard, white wine, fish and chicken, red wine, beef, and other meats. And, I think most things in life, absolutes don't always explain an entire issue or conundrum. And I think that's really true when it comes to food pairing as well. Rarely do you find, I believe, that if you enjoy what you're drinking and enjoying what you're eating, that you're not going to be happy. So I think that's the premise that I always use. I would never order a wine that I wasn't very excited about with a dish that I was, because odds are it's, can I say you can't polish a turd? That's basically what I'm going to say. So it's the way I look at it is, there's some really basic rules, that I go by: sweetness, acidity, those kinds of things. If you have a wine that's very acid driven, and you have a dish that's, like a ragu or some other, pasta sauce made with really acidic tomatoes, then your whole meal is going to be like, you feel like your teeth enamel is coming off. Likewise with dessert wine, you don't want to have a dessert I think that's sweeter than your wine, because that ends up being kind of funky. But in general, it's more about looking at complementary flavors, I think. So would you agree?
I would agree. I would also say that with a wine that's a little higher in acid, like this Chardonnay is, that it would be easy to pair it with, and good to pair it with, something that had some fat in it.
Absolutely. We all love bacon, so
yeah. Well, yeah, and even it goes with Thai food. It's got enough body to it that you can use it with mildly spicy foods without overwhelming it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't particularly enjoy it with tomato sauces, because the tomato totally overpowers it. You don't taste the wine that well. But that's kind of what it is whatever it goes with. You just don't want to overpower one or the other. That's the main point.
When I go home at night and my wife makes dinner and she's like, "Do you want a glass of wine? What do you want?" I always say, "Whatever's open."
Yeah.
So.
Likewise. Never let it go bad.
That's right. Exactly. Sure.
Hi, I'm Stephen Kent Mirasu from the Stephen Kent Winery in the Livermore Valley, and I have a question about how influential and important do you think the Wente clone of Chardonnay has been in California's Chardonnay making, and specifically, what do you feel its strengths and weaknesses are?
Good question.
Yeah. First of all, it's probably best to say there is no Wente clone. There's a Wente selection, and many of the clonal selections that are available today have their origins in the Wente selection. And so it has a major impact on California Chardonnay making. And Dad's vineyard was initially planted with a selection from Stony Hill Winery, which was a selection from Wente vineyards. And the challenges were very uneven production. And so a lot of newer clones have been selected for specific flavor profiles, for specific growth habits, and they're basically taking selections from the Wente selection and isolating it and coming up with clones that do what they want.
So for anyone who doesn't know how to grow grapevines, we don't grow them from seed. If you go, it sounds silly, but it's actually true. So all the grapevines commercially that you find nowadays are all grown from cuttings. And those are what we call clones. And going back a long time ago, there really weren't a whole lot of Chardonnay selections available in California, and actually not that long ago. And it was really through some of the research done at UC Davis by Harold Olmo, where he went around California and selected these vines here and there and bred them back at the UC Davis vineyard, and started to identify some of the flavor components that Bill was talking about. And a lot of those selections originally came from Wente in Livermore. And as things tend to, people have preferences for what they're looking for. People have certain flavor profiles they're interested in, and that has resulted in sort of this grand disbursement of all different kinds of cuttings and clonal material all over the valley and all over the world. And all of those have developed on their own, and it's very, very interesting to see how something simple. I mean, I always have to pinch myself. It's like a $4 billion industry, and we grow grapes. I mean, it's really incredible how much research and dollars is tied up into this humble little berry. But it goes back for at least a century in California, if not more. And Wente seriously is has the Wente family and the vineyard down in Livermore has there's just parentage there, I guess, that really what's the best way to put this? I guess you can see the lineage all over California, and you can kind of follow that family tree back to Wente. And although you may take one cutting, like some of Bill's cuttings are very aromatic, and his vines have a very unique flavor profile on their own, you may find another Wente selection down in Temecula that's completely different, but they can both trace their roots back to Wente. So I think it's safe to say it's been huge for the California wine industry.
Any other questions?
Sure, I'll ask one. How do you, there are discussions in terms of advancements in technology, and whether it's on the farming side or on the chemistry side, do you feel that as time goes by, that the artisanal influence is going to kind of get lost, or do you feel that it's really ultimately up to the winemaker's palate? And I guess that's it.
I don't think for great wine that the artisanal component will be lost. For the table wines, the things that you're going to have on the table every day probably are more technical and cookbook more type, and but the fine wines that the people are striving for, I think, will always have the input, both of the grower and the winemaker, because we're always trying to do something to enhance the flavor, to balance the fruit, to make sure the vines don't have more fruit on them than they can support and develop a full profile.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's hard to ask that question and have it blanket all wines in general, because if you look at the quality of the wines you can find for $8 in the grocery store now, it's heads and tails above what it was even 10 years ago. And just value is definitely there. And those wines are very technically made. I mean, they are made specific targets, and the only way that they can afford to put those wines on the grocery store shelves is by, essentially winemaking by numbers, by recipe. We don't paint by numbers by any stretch, but we are looking at the chemistry is very important. At the end of the day, the most important instrument is right here, and that's for everybody. I mean, our goal is to make you something that's delicious. When we sit down before we bottle any product at Montelena, and we make, the final blend, and we go through there, we sit down and we taste through, and we totally geek out, and we talk about all the different flavors and aromas. There's been some pretty weird ones. Bo was talking about galanga root or something. I didn't even know what that was. I had to go look it up. Apparently it's some kind of ginger-like root that they grow in Thailand. And anyway, we go through and we geek out about that stuff, and at the very end, Bo asks a very simple question. He says, "Is it delicious?" And because that's really what we're after. We want something that is going to be enjoyable, something that you want a second glass of. I mean, that's when I know that I've done my job, when you want a second glass. There are plenty of wines that you taste out there, and you folks are tasting today all up and down the valley, and I'm sure there was probably at least a wine where you said, okay, that 1 ounce pour, that was enough. Like, that was it. I don't want that to happen with any of our wines. I want you to come through, and I want you to be like, I want the whole bottle. And that is where the artisanal side comes in. And just as Bill said, that when you start getting into making fine wine, fine premium wine, that's something that you constantly have to focus on. You can put on your fancy artist hat and you can kind of go off the reservation, and there are a lot of people that do. But it's easy to do that and just focus on the art itself. I don't have an eye for art, but I know a lot of people that do, and I see some stuff and I'm just like, oh my God, what is that? But I guess it's beautiful art, but it doesn't really appeal to a lot of people. What we want is for our customers to really love our wines, and so in order to do that, we have to understand the basic chemistry to make sure we're on the right target, and then we use sort of the artisanal winemaking side of things in order to fulfill that and make it delicious.
So we have a bunch of questions that we don't have time for, actually, from Elizabeth, and we want to say and Amy have some questions.
Elizabeth.
Anyone who wants to ask questions can continue the conversation online. in the chat below the online video, the on-demand video that we're going to be posting up tomorrow. So thanks, you guys. Thanks, David and Paul and our live studio audience here. Isn't that great? And so, thanks for coming. And any final thoughts?
We just want to thank everybody again for coming today. It's been our pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. Wasn't sure what I was coming in for, but this was actually really cool.
Different experience,
yeah,
you know?
Without a doubt. And
this stage in your career of growing grapes, you know, you don't think you're going to be in a live chat.
We'd invite everyone who to come up and visit the winery at some point, or if not, can visit us at montelena.com. We'd love to have you out.
Thank you.
Thank you.